Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for joining us in another episode of today's Electrical Estimating. My name is Chris Trommer, and today we're just going to be picking up where we left off with Keith Prather from last week. As you know, we sort of dove into what's been going on over the last 365 days when it comes to tariffs, what we have in store coming into July, and what's currently happening. The topic we're going to pick up with today is more regarding onshoring. Something we spoke about last year. It was a big goal for the tariffs was to onshore manufacturing back to the U.S. So we're going to speak with Keith, sort of see what's been going on over the last year, what's attributed to some of the changes, if people are still going with their diversification of their supply chain, really jump into this, give you some insight into what may have changed, what has stayed the same, and what may need to happen to see changes and more onshoring take place. So, hope you enjoyed the episode. Talk to you soon. And I think that leads in well to my next question was global supply chain right now, because we took a lot of time last time we talked and we had China plus one. We talked about, China X. We talked about onshoring. We talked about all the different ways that manufacturing has changed over the last decade or so because of tariffs that were imposed across different administrations where companies they had their China supplier, but they also were supplying from Vietnam or the Philippines, or they were also getting a portion of it from Mexico, and they're playing the shell game. They have maybe some production in the United States as well, but they played the shell game to see what worked best for them and where they can stay competitive, bringing in from multiple sources. Obviously, one of the goals for tariffs, which was one of the main goals that was talked about, was onshoring a lot of manufacturing back to the United States. You spoke to it before, is that this isn't something where we snap our fingers and then we're up and running within a day. This is going to be 3, 4, 5 years of finding locations, prepping it, building, bringing in the automation that's probably required, bringing in the people that can run the plants, all this stuff. So it's not something that happens overnight. Have you seen a big shift from those strategies we talked about before, or is it sort of staying status quo for the time being with the supply chain? Have you seen things that have broken out and you go, oh, that's new? Have people made different shifts of going, hey, we're going to start moving more to one part of the world than the other? Or is it just sort of people are uncertain, so they're just sticking with what they got and seeing how it all falls?
I think what they're doing right now is same strategy that we talked about before. So it's a diversified global sourcing strategy, and they're spreading the risk out. I think what's happened is they're using tariffs less as a critical decision point. It is one of the factors, but I
Yeah.
think they're using everything from geopolitics to how we physically move goods, and they're using that as a bigger part of their overall decision-making process on where they end up putting products. Like, I know, like, the US automotive industry now has gone ahead and started to tell a lot of their suppliers, you need to go ahead and start the process of moving at least a portion of your manufacturing into the United States. But more importantly than anything, you need to get it closer to our manufacturing facilities, because what we want to do is we want to start shifting over to more of back to a just in time or a lean inventory management system. So it's almost based more on that used to be the old Japanese model of Kaizen, where you produce your products near the point of consumption.
Yeah.
And that was the most effective, most cost effective way to do that. And now kind of learning a little bit of that, I think, to a degree that, that's maybe the bigger strategy here. And tariffs will be what they will. We'll figure all that out. But the bigger decision on reshoring is going to be based on a number of factors and not just tariffs singularly.
Now,
I
let
mean,
me ask you a question real quick. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but something that you were just mentioning there. So, if you have a Ford plant in, Wisconsin, and that obviously they're not making all the parts there, they're pretty much assembling the vehicle. Are you saying for moving the production of some of these additional assembly of the parts closer by, would that be a beneficial to them because then they're not having to pay for as much transportation costs? They don't have to hold as much inventory. They can more create products on demand as they need or parts on demand to put into this as they're needed. And it could cut down other costs as well than other than just onshoring for the tariffs because it would be more localized. So transportation's down, inventory's down. You don't have to make 50,000 steering wheels and then ship them because it's going to take 3 weeks to get shipped across the world when you can just go down the street, have them make 1,000 for the cars you're producing that week. Is that sort of the
Yeah.
mind? Yeah.
Yeah, and also, if you think about the OEM has less carrying cost exposure for that inventory. I mean, ultimately, they've committed to the inventory, but since they can locally get a delivery, like on the day a car's going to be going and put into assembly,
Yeah.
they can get shipments in the back door, and those wheels, instead of ordering 50,000 at a time, like you said, if they know they've got 1,000 rolling off, in a week, they can go get those 1,000 in the back door, roll them off in a week, have no inventory sitting there. Basically, it's lean inventory management.
Yeah.
And I used automotive as just one example because I am hearing rumors of some suppliers that have held off on making that move, and now they're at a point where the clock is ticking, and they know they've got 2 or 3 years to get it done, and so now they're trying to figure out site locations and trying to start those projects.
Yeah.
But I've seen it in so many other industries. Like, think about a battery manufacturer. Most of the battery manufacturers in the United States, wherever they're doing that final assembly in those batteries, they have provisions that require their suppliers to be within a 50-mile range of that facility because of that same lean manufacturing or lean inventory carrying management. And so you can't set that up in a way where, as you said, slow boat from China coming into the United
Yeah.
States. Yeah, you can't afford 6 to 8 weeks on the water and then have a situation like the Strait of Hormuz or the Suez Canal get shut down, and suddenly I get a phone call saying, "Oh, we've got to go add 3 weeks to that."
Well,
Um,
are we looking, and sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
yeah.
Are we looking more at, instead of large manufacturing facilities for some of these companies that are already have some manufacturing here, are we looking at more moving the smaller production of parts that go into the overall product back to onshoring closer to these facilities instead of seeing as we think of? Because I think in my mind when they say we're bringing it back, that you think these million square foot, manufacturing plants like we see in Detroit, where 10,000 people are walking in and out. Are we looking more at smaller facilities that are more specialized for a particular area that will then live within a 30-mile radius of a larger plant? And that being the strategy of offshoring instead of, I mean, onshoring, excuse me, then this big picture that we see these massive facilities like data centers, but manufacturing plants being built. Is that really the more the picture that we should be envisioning in our minds the than that overall large scale?
We actually went in and did some research on this, and, what we're finding is it's all over the board. It
Got it.
really depends on the industry and what works best as a strategy for that industry. Because we thought the same thing. We thought, first off, you think about an OEM, and an OEM has got tier 1, 2, and 3 suppliers. We thought maybe the tier 1s would be reshoring, so bigger facilities, assembling bigger components of the vehicle to go input into the final assembly. And then it'd be the tier 2s and 3s, and maybe you're still importing products from, but we're learning it's all over the and again, depends on the specific company, where they can get products most efficiently, most cost effectively that kind of meet their specs. So there's
Got it.
some products in the world that you're just not going to be able to produce in the US. We just can't do it
Yeah.
cheap enough, and we can't do it good enough. Well, we can do it good enough. We can't do it cheap enough.
Keep going.
And and the quality of the products we're getting from other parts of the world are sufficient, right? They do what we need them to do. So those are not going to reshore here. It's still going to be, I think, if you're going to say anything, it's still going to be around advanced manufacturing. I think that's probably where we still are going to see the most of the reshoring activity,
Got
which
it.
is great for electrical contractors because that means those are going to be the most automated, most robotic, highest HVAC demand. Those are going to be the ones that need the most critical electrical systems and redundancies and everything in place.
Now, one thing, before we move on, because you mentioned their tariffs really not being the main driver for a lot of these conversations that are being had. It's more supply chain, things that we see between wars and access and global pandemics and all the other BS that we've had to live through over the last 2 decades. It seems like it never ends. Would tariffs have to be pretty much like 100% across the board to be something that's really on these companies' minds to be like, we have to onshore? Would it have to be 200%? Would it have to get to such an extravagant to drive these companies to go? all right, we got to start building tomorrow to be there. I mean, obviously, like you said, it's part of the conversation, but there's so many outside factors that are going to get attributed to their decision to come onshore. If it's even viable, the profitability, the transportation, there's so much. It seems like, and tariffs just make up a tiny piece. Would tariffs to have to be a larger piece of that puzzle? Would it have to be 300% tariff increase across the board for people to really sit down and go, okay, we got to do this now because tariffs are pushing us in that direction?
Yeah, it's probably not actually that high, but there has to be some other things in place. So if it's a 25 or 30% tariff, there are points in time when I'm considering maybe I should reshore, especially if I can use robotics and automation to do that. The
Mhm.
problem is in many cases, I've got to go get something legal or from a trade basis that backstops me, okay, that protects me. So, for instance, let's take rare earths. Rare earths is a great example. So, you hear
Mhm.
about rare earth manufacturing. Why don't we do more of the processing here in the United States? The problem is that when we open a processing facility in the U.S., we may have that rare earth sitting in the ground in the United States, and we can pull it out of the ground. The problem is processing it is dirty and expensive. And once we build that processing plant, what's happened to us in the past is it's so expensive to do it here that China or another country just floods the market with that material, drops the bottom out of the price, and that facility can't stay open.
Got it.
So it's not just the fact that I go through a 50% tariff on top of what's happening in China. I got to make sure that number one, that sticks. Number
Yep.
two, I've got to provide some safeguards for that company investing the money in that facility in the US. And so it's across products that way. I think just needs to be more than just a tariff.
Yeah, because I think that's something that's always gotten me is like everybody, yeah, we're going to come build, we're going to come onshore, do all this. And then it's like, well, what happens if we backpedal, get rid of the tariffs, and then it's back to business, and now it's going to be actually cheaper to make it because there's no more tariffs in China and import it than you are actually making in the US. And now you're cutting the legs out of everybody that's put billions of dollars to build the plant here and hire hundreds of people and do all the automation. Now they're getting undercut and can't stay in the business. And now the manufacturing is a ghost town. So I think that alludes to the conversation we had before is getting solid, certain sort of factual and hard ironclad trade agreements so that people can understand, like you said, make the decision. Are we going to stay overseas? Are we going to onshore? And maybe that's attributing to why they're not fully onshoring, but maybe those tier one, tier threes, tier twos that are coming in bits and pieces.
Yeah, and things are like heavy labor intensive. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest discussion points, to be honest. And I should have said that right up front. But if it requires a lot of labor to produce a product, then that's really tough to onshore. It's really
Yeah.
tough to bring back to the U.S. If it can be automated and we can use a lot of automation, robotics, and advanced technology to produce it, much easier to make the financial justification to be able to onshore it and to bring it back.